At exactly 3:02 a.m., something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. Not according to official narratives, not according to years of investment, and definitely not according to the confidence people had in one of the most advanced defense networks on the planet. Iran's fifth strike didn't just land, it exposed a crack. And what makes this moment different isn't the explosion itself, it's what that explosion represents. Because up until that point, every wave had been framed as controlled, contained, handled. But this time, something slipped through in a way that changed the entire equation. Before we break this down, you need to understand why this matters. Because what you've been shown so far focuses on interceptions, on percentages, on success rates. But what you haven't been shown is how those numbers are achieved, and more importantly, what they cost over time. This isn't just about whether a missile gets stopped, it's about how many resources it takes to stop it and what happens when that math stops working. The first wave started hours earlier, just after midnight. It looked routine, a small volley, limited targeting, immediate response. Defense systems activated, interceptors launched, and early reports suggested near-perfect performance. That's what everyone saw. But here's what nobody is telling you. That first wave wasn't meant to break anything. It was meant to initiate the cycle. Wave 2 followed quickly. Slightly larger, slightly more aggressive, different angles, different timing, still manageable, still within expected parameters. But now the system wasn't just responding, it was sustaining. And sustained defense is where the real strain begins, because every engagement consumes something you can't instantly replace. By wave 3, the pattern started to reveal itself. This wasn't random escalation, it was controlled pressure. The timing between strikes narrowed just enough to prevent full reset cycles. Systems had to remain active. Operators stayed on high alert. And every interceptor fired was one less available for what might come next. Wave 4 intensified the rhythm. More projectiles, broader targeting spread, the defensive grid lit up across multiple regions at once. Interception rates still looked strong on paper. But here's the part that should worry you. Maintaining those rates required more interceptors per target. Redundancy increased, cost per engagement rose. Efficiency started to decline, not dramatically, but enough to matter over time. And then came Wave 5. This is where everything changes. Because Wave 5 wasn't just bigger. It was different. Reports began to indicate altered flight profiles, possible decoys, variations in speed and trajectory. Suddenly, the system wasn't just tracking threats, it was trying to identify them in real time under pressure. And when identification becomes uncertain, response becomes heavier. More interceptors launched, more overlap, more resource drain. But here's what nobody is explaining clearly. Defense systems are built on probabilities. They're designed to maximize the chance of interception, not guarantee it. So when uncertainty increases, the only way to maintain confidence is to increase response volume. That's exactly what happened here. Now imagine this from inside the system. It's been hours of continuous engagement, alerts coming in at irregular intervals, no clear pattern to anticipate. Every decision has to be made in seconds. And with each wave, the margin for error shrinks. Then, the moment happens. One projectile, just one, makes it through. Not because the system failed completely, but because under sustained pressure, even the most advanced networks can't maintain perfection indefinitely. And that single impact is enough to shift perception. Because it proves something critical. The system can be penetrated, and this is where things escalate beyond the immediate. Because once that threshold is crossed, the strategy changes. It's no longer about whether something can get through, it's about how often, and how quickly that frequency can increase if the pattern continues. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where the real story is hidden. If each incoming missile requires multiple interceptors for a high probability stop, and each interceptor carries a significant cost, then every wave isn't just an attack. It's an economic event. Multiply that across 5 waves, and you're looking at hundreds of defensive responses in just a few hours. And here's the imbalance. The cost to defend is often significantly higher than the cost to attack. That gap matters. Because over time, it creates a situation where even successful defense becomes unsustainable. This is where things start to shift from tactical to strategic. Because by the time Wave 5 ended, the system had already absorbed multiple cycles of stress. Inventory levels weren't what they were at the start. Response times may still have been fast, but the margin for redundancy was shrinking, and this is the part that should concern you. Defense isn't just about stopping what's coming now, it's about being ready for what comes next. So what happens if there is a next wave? This is where the pattern becomes more important than the individual event, because the structure of these strikes suggests something intentional. Gradual escalation, controlled timing, sustained pressure. It's not about overwhelming the system instantly, it's about wearing it down over time. Now imagine being on the receiving end of this. It's the middle of the night. Sirens go off, you move to shelter, minutes pass, silence, then another alert, and another. There's no clear end, no predictable gap, just a constant cycle of tension and release. That's not just a physical threat, it's psychological pressure applied continuously. And psychological pressure has a compounding effect. It affects decision-making. It affects perception. It affects how people interpret what's happening around them. Because even if most threats are intercepted, the experience of repeated alerts creates a sense that the system isn't fully in control. Now here's where we reach the midpoint, and the part that changes everything. Because what Wave 5 revealed wasn't just a momentary gap. It revealed a limitation. Not in technology, but in endurance. Because no system, no matter how advanced, is designed to operate at peak efficiency indefinitely under sustained attack. And once that limitation is understood, it can be exploited. This is where future waves become more dangerous, not because they're bigger, but because they're smarter. They don't need to overwhelm completely. They just need to maintain pressure long enough for the system to degrade. And degradation doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually. Slight delays, slight reductions in redundancy, slight increases in risk, until eventually, those small changes add up to something significant. Now extend this scenario beyond a single night. What happens if this pattern continues for days, weeks? The numbers start to compound. Inventory depletion accelerates. Costs rise. Decision-making becomes more complex. And this is where the conversation shifts to something much bigger. Because this isn't just about one system or one event. It's about the nature of modern defense. The idea that protection can be maintained indefinitely against sustained pressure. And what happens when that assumption is challenged. Now consider the broader implications. If one sequence of 5 waves can produce this level of strain, what happens at 10? At 20? At continuous intervals over time? At what point does the system transition from proactive defense to reactive survival? And this is the part that most people aren't asking. Because the focus remains on immediate outcomes, what was intercepted, what was stopped. But the long-term picture tells a different story, one where success today doesn't guarantee sustainability tomorrow. By the end of the 5th strike, the narrative had already begun to shift, not publicly, not officially, but structurally, because the data tells its own story. And that story points to something deeper than a single event. It points to a test. A test of capacity, a test of endurance, a test of how long a system can operate under continuous demand before the cost, both economic and operational, becomes too high to sustain. And here's the final question. If 5 waves were enough to expose the weakness, what happens when the next wave isn't just a continuation, but an escalation? Because at that point, it's no longer about whether the system works. It's about whether it can keep working. And that's a very different question.